Welcome back, everyone. As I've promised you in the previous session, this one is going to be about sustainability, and we have a guest speaker that is very passionate about this area. He also has a podcast about it called Climate 21, but his day-to-day job is as a global vice president, futurist, and innovation evangelist at SAP. His name is Tom Rafferty. Tom is going to talk to us about how sustainability is no longer something nice to have in your company, but a real necessity that you should try to implement as soon as possible. And he's going to show us what that means to your business. Tom, can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear, Octavian, yes.
Hi, it's a pleasure having you here. Thank you for accepting our invitation.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a great
Okay.
honor.
It's great. I just want to remind people that they can leave questions for you in the Q&A section or in the chat section of this session, and I'll let you have the stage. You can start the presentation whenever you feel like it.
Appreciate it. Thanks again, Octavian. So the talk I'm giving this morning is, as I mentioned, or as Octavian mentioned, the sustainability imperative. This is a photograph of my dad. I took this picture on the occasion of his 80th birthday. I'm from Ireland. I live in Spain now, but I'm from Ireland. And on his 80th birthday, we organized a big family get together, big party. Lots of his brothers and sisters, big Irish family were there. It was a fabulous day. That's why he looks so happy. The reason I'm showing him is because a lot of the reason that I'm so interested and passionate about sustainability, as Octavian pointed out, is because of him. When I was growing up as a kid, he used to take me to the country every weekend. We would walk on farms, we would walk in the woods, that kind of thing. And it inculcated in me a deep, deep love of nature. And I went on to study biology in university. I did 4 years of a PhD project on biological control systems. And while doing that, I started working on computers for, data analysis and things like that, and started to get distracted by computers. And then I shifted into working in technology full time. But now I'm in the very fortunate position where I get to merge my two passions, sustainability and technology, working in the era I'm in at the moment. And unfortunately, my father is no longer with us. It's not that he died, it's that he was diagnosed in 2010 with Alzheimer's. So now 11 years later, there's nothing left of him, mentally at least. He's still with us physically. But in some ways, that's almost a good thing because, he would have been extremely nervous and saddened had he seen what's gone on in the world in the last 18 months with COVID. So he's missed out on all that, and he's in his own happy little place, which is nice too. The world has changed enormously in the last 18 months. And I'm not actually talking about COVID now. I'm talking about climate. And there has been an enormous shift in climate in the last 18 months, a lot of which you may have missed because of the headlines around COVID. So, for example, here in the EU adopted climate legislation mandating all 27 nations of the EU to reduce their climate emissions 55% by 2030. This is legally binding on all 27 nations of the EU. And to put that in context, 55%, we managed to reduce our global emissions last year by 7% in the midst of a pandemic, just by virtue of the fact that most businesses shut down for a while. Those emissions went back up 5% again this year. So overall emissions are down 2% in the last 2 years. In the next 8 years to 2030, we have to reduce them 55%. It is an enormously ambitious undertaking. Not just here in the EU, the US has announced that they want to reduce their emissions 52% by 2030. Now, that may change given that the United States political system is incredibly fickle, but hopefully not. And, the legislation in the US anyway, apart from, the Trump administration, has always been getting better and better and better in terms of these things. And I think it will continue to do so. I don't think it'll go back anymore. China as well has said that they're going to become carbon neutral before 2060. And they've also mandated that all the regions in China have to source 40% of their energy from renewables by 2030. They've also said their emissions are going to peak by 2030. So in the next 8 years from here to 2030, we are going to see enormous changes globally. And just last night, China and the US announced their plans to work together on cutting emissions. And this is a huge, huge deal, because these are the two largest global emitters, and they had been kind of at loggerheads. But they came together last night and they said they are going now, the two of them, to work together on making sure that they each reduce their emissions. Even Saudi Arabia, who are not noted for their sustainability initiatives, have said that they are going to get 50% of their energy from renewables by 2030. So this is an unbelievable change in the global attitudes to climate change and sustainability. And what it means is the global economy is about to become the climate economy. What do I mean by that? I mean that the ambition that has been put forward by each of these global blocs, China, the US, the EU, even Saudi, the ambition to achieve those aims is so big that every single business decision going forward will be based not just on its financial implications, but also on its climate implications. There will be sweeping changes in regulations, which will require big changes in our economy, which will require businesses to report their emissions and set targets and report against those targets. All kinds of new legislation is going to have to be brought in to reach those goals. There are other stakeholders involved as well, not just the regulators, but also the court systems. The court in France just last month mandated that the government has to meet its own greenhouse gas reduction targets. And it's not just France. We had similar rulings happen in the Netherlands and Germany in the last few months. And there's going to be more and more climate actions taken through the courts. The Treasury in the US, the United States Treasury, has said that any development banks operating out of the US can no longer finance fossil fuel projects. And similarly, we had China saying that it's not going to finance any new coal-fired power plants. So we're seeing that the financial community getting on board. The investment community is getting on board as well. They've set tough new targets for big oil, and even individual companies like JP Morgan are investing heavily in platforms for ESG investing. ESG is environment, social and governance, sustainability basically. So we see as well, because of this huge interest in ESG, in sustainability, now the cost of capital for fossil fuels is going up and up. So if you look at the green line on this chart and the black line on this chart, the green line is the cost of capital, the cost of borrowing money for offshore oil has gone from 10% 10 years ago to now over 20%. For natural gas, it's gone from 1 to 2% 10 years ago to now 10%. And that trend is going to continue. Whereas the other lines in this are the cost of capital for renewables, which has gone from close to 10% to now under 5%. And that trend is going to continue. The cost of capital for renewables is going to get cheaper. So it's going to be easier for renewable projects to borrow money. It'll cost them less, and it's going to become more expensive for fossil fuels. So it looks to me like not just the regulatory environment is going to get rid of fossil fuels, but also the financial community. And if we think of other stakeholders yet again, people like employees in an organization. More increasingly, employees in an organization are demanding that the companies they work for be climate friendly, have a good sustainability story to tell. I was talking to, on one of my podcasts, I was talking to a guy called Ken Pucker. Ken is the former chief operating officer for Timberland, and they were one of the first big companies to embrace sustainability and do sustainability reporting. And he said that because they were doing this, they found it far easier to recruit extremely high-level candidates for any jobs that they advertised. And also, they were able to retain their staff for much longer. People didn't want to leave because they wanted to join the Timberland because it was an organization that was working for a purpose. So if you are a purpose-led organization, you will find it easier to find new good talent, and you will find it easier to retain that talent. And when you think of the cost of recruitment and retention of employees, that's a huge win right there. And the other side of it is, of course, your customers. Your customers also want to be buying sustainable products increasingly. So if you have a good sustainability story to tell, you will attract and keep high-value customers as well. So the sustainability story is increasingly becoming more and more important for organizations, and it's going to become even more so. And if we look at a couple of the industries that are heavily involved in this, we look first at the energy industry. I mentioned them there a minute ago. Sheikh Yamani, who was the OPEC oil minister in the 1980s, very famously said that the Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stone, and similarly, the oil age will end long before the world runs out of oil. And that's true. That's happening today. Peak oil happened around 2017, 2018. And it's not because of reasons of people being interested in the climate, you might say, unfortunately, but it's actually for reasons of economics, which is even better because it's more sustainable. And I mean sustainable in the long term, because if it's down to money is what makes all business decisions happen. So we've reached a point now, because the price of renewables keeps dropping year on year on year, and the price of fossil fuels is going up all the time. It's now cheaper to build a new fossil fuel plant than it is to fuel an it's cheaper to build a new renewable plant than it is to fuel an existing fossil fuel plant. And I mean, that's just absolutely incredible. That's a massive, massive turning point. It's cheaper to build from greenfield a new renewable power plant than it is to simply fuel an existing fossil fuel plant. So the economics make total sense. And here's the numbers for that in these three large blocks: China, India, and Germany. You can see it is cheaper to build new than fuel existing. And it's not just the price of the renewables, it's also the price of storage mediums. We all know renewables are variable generators. Now we can store that energy in large lithium-ion batteries because it's economically viable to do so. And it's not just that the cost of the batteries is falling, the energy density of the batteries is increasing as well. It's now, the energy density of lithium-ion batteries has tripled since 2010, and the price has fallen 90%. And so we're seeing these huge renewable energy plants being rolled out. Sun Cable, for example, is building a massive solar and battery power plant in the Northern Territories in Australia. It's a 20 gigawatt solar power plant. 20 gigawatts, just for context, is the output roughly of 20 nuclear power plants. So they're going to use this huge facility backed up with batteries, 36 gigawatt hours of battery storage. They're going to use this to power the city of Darwin, and they're also going to run a 3,500 kilometer cable north to power the city of Singapore as well. And hence that headline there says the Indonesian approval. They've just gotten approval from Indonesia to run their cable up past Indonesia to get to Singapore. And it's not just that, there's loads more like this. We're seeing new headlines like this all the time. In Kazakhstan, they're now building a 45 gigawatt renewable plant to make green hydrogen. So 45 gigawatts, 45 nuclear power plants worth of renewable energy, solar and wind combined to make green hydrogen. And we'll talk about why they want to make green hydrogen in a minute. Transportation is being heavily disrupted as well. It's going green. I mentioned I live in Spain. I moved here in 2008, and when I did, I needed to buy a car. And my filter at the time for buying a car was lowest emissions. The best car I could get for lowest emissions at the time was a Prius. So this is the car I bought, a Toyota Prius. At the time, it could drive on electricity for about half a kilometer, and then the engine would come on as long as you stayed below 25 kilometers an hour. So really, really unsatisfactory in terms of its electrical abilities. Fast forward 10 years, I bought a Nissan Leaf in 2018. And you can see at 51% state of charge here, it has a range of 130 kilometers. So overall, it has a range of about 250 kilometers on a good day, driving downhill with a strong tailwind. You know, not fantastic, but still way better than the Prius. And I used it all the time. Fabulous, fabulous car. But the 250 kilometer thing was a little bit limiting, particularly here in Spain, where the rollout of public chargers is still quite poor. Then earlier this year, I got this. This is a VW ID4. And you can see at 100%, it has a range now of 527 kilometers. That depends on how you drive it. Sometimes if you drive this on a motorway at 120, 130 kilometers an hour, that range will drop down to around 370 kilometers. Still pretty good, and it charges really quickly. Takes a charge at 125 kilowatts, and they're going to upgrade that soon. So an amazing car and a huge shift in 3 years. The best car available in Spain in 2018 had a range of 250 kilometers, the Nissan Leaf. Fast forward just 3 years, and the range is now over 500 kilometers. So a huge shift, and that'll tell you the way electric vehicles are changing. Norway has decided it's going to phase out the sale of internal combustion engine vehicles in 2025. So just 3 years from now. But in fact, they're already at 90% sales now being electric vehicles, 90% new vehicle sales, and they're on track with the trends to actually go 100% by roughly April of next year. So this can happen. And during August of this year, every fourth new car in Western Europe was a plug-in electric car. And we shouldn't just talk about personal transportation. We should be talking about public transportation as well, because that has a huge part to play in this. And I love this quote from Enrique Peñalosa, who's the former mayor of Bogota, where he says, "A developed country is not a place where poor people have cars, it's where rich people use public transportation." And in the public transportation sector, we're starting to see bus services go fully electric. London's electric bus fleet is now the largest in Europe. We're starting to see the taxis in the UK go electric as well. Addison Lee, who are the largest taxi company in the UK, have said they're switching all their taxis to EVs in the next year, just over a year, by 2023. They're buying 4,000 ID4s from Volkswagen. Trucks are going electric as well. Volkswagen are spending 2.2 billion on electric vehicles. It's not just them, it's all the big truck manufacturers. Volvo have launched these 3 fully electric trucks, for example, that are for sale today. And the smaller delivery market, there's lots of them happening now. Every time you get an Amazon delivery here in Spain today, it comes in a Mercedes e-Citaro, fully electric e-Citaro. Amazon have ordered 100,000 electric vans from Rivian. I'd love to have been the sales guy that took that order. And ferries are going electric as well. Shipping is going electric. We're seeing this Washington State Ferries, who are the second largest ferry company in the world, switching completely to batteries. And Maersk, biggest shipping company in the world, are talking about getting green methanol so that they move away from the kind of bunker fuels that are used in their massive container ships today. And the green methanol is the kind of output that you can get from the kind of green hydrogen plant we saw in Kazakhstan a couple of minutes ago. Other sectors that are shifting rapidly, we're seeing things like the concrete sector looking into this big time, and concrete is a massive emitter globally. And there's all kinds of initiatives happening in that space. Similarly, the steel space, Germany is spending 6 billion now to clean up its steel production. We're seeing ArcelorMittal changing 2 of their plants to making steel using green hydrogen. Again, the kind of thing that was coming out of Kazakhstan and others. There are other green hydrogen initiatives as well. I don't want you to think that Kazakhstan one is the only one. Volvo is the first car maker to explore using fossil-free steel from SSAB. And SSAB have produced their first fossil-free steel in Sweden, and they have delivered it to Volvo. And Volvo were talking about producing all their cars using this kind of steel by 2026. The airline industry, United Airlines have bought 100 fully electric 19-seat planes from a company called Heart Aerospace. So it's starting to happen in the aviation space as well. It's going to take a lot longer in the aviation space because it's really, really hard. Airbus have revealed this blended wing craft, which is going to be powered by hydrogen as well. They're talking about that coming on stream around 2050. In the meantime, they'll be producing hybrids starting around 2035 of their A320s. What kind of actions can you or your organization take? Well, real easy, low-hanging fruit. Convert everything you can to electric. Convert your heating, convert your cooling, your air conditioning, convert your transportation, convert your cooking, whatever it is, convert it all to electric, and then source your electricity from a 100% renewable energy company. Boom, straight away, huge, huge reduction. Next, set targets for your organization. Measure your emissions and report against those targets. Do it publicly if you're a company. Another one is become more circular. Investigate circular technologies, how to make your organization more circular, which is a really good idea anyway, because it reduces your waste and it reduces your costs, because you're sourcing some of your feedstock from some of what would have been formerly waste, something that would have been thrown away. Require emissions reporting on all your RFPs and RFQs. So as you go out to tender, require people coming to tender to report the emissions implications of what it is you're sourcing. Set an internal carbon price within your organization so that all projects have to report how much carbon the project is going to take, and they have to pay that carbon price to your company sustainability organization. And lastly, tie your executive remuneration to emissions KPIs. This is a huge one. This is one I think that potentially has the most potential to move the needle. Last thoughts. The 2020s, we're calling them the decade of action. And, they really have to be, because that 55% target will require a lot of action to get there. However, that's the low-hanging fruit. That 55%, that first 55%, that's real low-hanging fruit. That means the 2030s are going to be the decade of way more action as we try and get more harder emissions out of the system. And it means the 2040s are going to be the decade of, holy crap, that's a lot of action. I came across this fantastic quote by Professor Kevin Anderson, where he said, "We face an unavoidably radical future. We either continue with rising emissions and reap the radical repercussions of severe climate change, or we acknowledge that we have a choice and then we pursue radical emissions reductions. Either way, there is no longer a non-radical option." Now is the time for us all to take action and for us all to become climate heroes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That was very inspiring, and you managed to end everything on a funny note. I chuckled at the end right there. I have a couple of questions for you. The first of all, sure. We have seen an increase of people's interest regarding sustainability and climate change, and I'm talking about the final consumers. And we've also seen some companies trying to take advantage of that by something that the industry and the people have started calling greenwashing. What
Yeah.
do you think would be a solution to greenwashing and companies trying to act like they're taking steps towards sustainability, but also actually using what they're saying as a marketing opportunity?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Um, the this is a very still immature space, and so that's why, and that's how the likes of greenwashing can become a thing. But that is going to change, and that's going to change quite quickly, because we're starting to see, as I alluded to, we're starting to see more and more legislation come to the fore requiring organizations to report their emissions. And there's an EU ruling which is going to require companies with more than, I think it's 100 employees to report their emissions starting in 2024. Now, that will also, the way companies have to report is going to be more and more strictly monitored as well. So we're going to start to see the kind of reporting required for emissions mirror the kind of reporting that's required for finances. So it will be, the reporting will start to move to the CFO's organization within companies, and it will have to be externally audited as well. And when you start to see that, and that's in the next 2-3 years that's going to happen. When you start to see that, then it's going to be very, very difficult for organizations to greenwash. And if they do try it, it'll be very easy to expose the fact that they are greenwashing, which holds a massive reputational risk.
That's a very fair point. And the second question is about electric vehicles, which we all know they are awesome and they're getting better and better each day. But there's one issue with them, and that's the batteries. We have representatives from the auto industry saying they don't have the capacity yet to recycle the batteries in electric vehicles. What do you see as a solution for this problem?
So you got to realize that the batteries in electric vehicles are not like the batteries in our phones at all. Similar chemistry, yes, but they're not like it because they are incredibly well managed. There's a thing called a BMS, a battery management system, in every electric vehicle, which means that the capacity of the batteries in electric vehicles drops a roughly 1% every 30,000 kilometers driven, which means after 300,000 kilometers driven, which is approximately the life of a car in Europe, after 300,000, they're still at 90% of original capacity. So the batteries don't fade out or die during the lifetime of the vehicle. At end of life of vehicle, yeah, certainly they will need to be recycled. But just think, the ID4 that I got earlier this year has a battery of 77 kilowatt hours. If that gets to 80%, let's say I drive it 600,000 kilometers and it gets to 80% of its original capacity, that's still over 60 kilowatt hours of usable battery. Now, if you think of the Tesla Powerwall battery that you can buy and stick on your wall at home to store power, that's got a battery capacity of 14 kilowatt hours. So the batteries at 80% of original capacity are 3 times what the Tesla Powerwall is. These batteries are, at end of life, they will be used for stationary storage. Unlikely for homes, because they'll just be too big for an individual home. What they'll more likely be used for is the kind of storage that I was showing in the Sun Cable example. So utility companies will start purchasing them in bulk and using them for grid storage for renewable projects that they roll out.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It does make sense. Thank you, Tom Rafferty, Global VP Futurist and Innovation Evangelist at SAP.